All right, good morning. So we're on page 161. And some of our viewers on YouTube, the one or two that are following us, asked me to put to say exactly where we are in the Talmud. So this is Baba Metzia, chapter 9. It's 104b. And in our Steinsaltz, we're on page 161 at the bottom of the page. Verse 6, we started this last time. We even read the Steinsaltz definition of Iska, which is on the right margin. So we're going to go through it again. There's some complicated material here, and I'm apologizing from the outset that we're not going to go into detail. It's a bit of a sideshow for our chapter, and we're going to start a new chapter pretty soon. And they're actually very difficult, and I'm not sure it's really worth it for us to unpack all the concepts. We'll see as it comes. The point of difficulty for an Iska is that for certain business arrangements, you need loans in a sophisticated economy, and there are laws against lending at interest in the Torah, but you can't really have businesses that will prosper unless there's ways that you can pay back the loan with interest. Otherwise, there's no incentive for the person to lend you money. So they come up with complicated arrangements to get around it, which we're going to read about. I'm going to say really briefly, and I'll repeat it also. I'm not going to go through the math every time they come up with an example. That's where I'm sort of drawing the line. I'm not going to go back to my high school math. I'm going to stay with very elevated concepts, and I'll let you do the math, or you can read the math in Steinsaltz. But it goes something like this: to get around the prohibition against lending at interest, they have to kind of redefine what the lender is doing. And so, very briefly, and we'll get into maybe a little bit of detail, the person who is lending the money has to have a relatively high risk, okay? So he's not actually lending the money, he's more like an investor, has to have a relatively high risk and also a relatively low amount of profit. And when I say relative to the other partner. So there are going to be two partners. There's going to be the person who provides the money, the cash, the capital, and there's going to be the investor. We'll call that person the investor or the lender. And there's going to be the active partner who's going to do all the work. It's going to take the money and do all the work to start the business. So the investor has a higher risk. That's how we get around the prohibition against lending at interest, is that she understands she's taking a higher risk and also going to get a relatively lower amount of profit, whereas the active partner, who's the borrower...
Yeah, he's not okay. Are you all right? Are you okay, Eric?
Yeah, I'm okay. I haven't heard any of
I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's okay. The borrower is going to take less of a risk and actually take more profit.
Right.
Okay, so keep that in mind. So page 161. And then we'll read, there's this complicated way that you divide the money, which is a kind of legal fiction. So we'll get into that. Page 161, 6 at the bottom, Amar Nehardei. The Nehardeians said. Now, one of the reasons we're quoting the Nehardeians is because we had quoted them earlier, right, about a different law. So as long as we're on the subject of the Nehardeians, we're quoting them. By the way, again, just one of the reasons I'm not going to spend that much time. Remember, the subject of our chapter is leasing fields, and this is getting us far afield from leasing fields. Although it's related in the sense that leasing a field is a kind of business arrangement, which is similar too, because you have two partners. One of the partners owns the field and wants to get income from the field, but for whatever reason can't work the field himself. And then you've got the sharecropper, whatever you want to call him, who is working the field and then paying a percentage of the crop to the owner. So that's a kind of iska, right? It's a kind of business. So as long as we're talking about that, we'll talk about a different kind of interest, a different kind of field, a different kind of business. It's a different kind of business where the similarities are you've got somebody with capital and you've got somebody without capital. And the two of them are going to get together and try to make some money for each other. And the Torah which, by the way, is not just a practical document. It's it's an ethical document. Is concerned about the rights of both, but in particular is concerned about the rights of the person without any capital. The fear being that he or she is going to be taken advantage of. So that's why you come up with these complicated arrangements to protect both, but with a special interest on the person that's got nothing. And in both cases, you've got a person that's got no capital, and all they've got is their hands to work with. Okay. So Amar Nardea, the Nardean said, Hi Iska. Definition of Iska, page 162. This is how it works. Palga milve, half of it is a loan. Palga pikadon, half of the money we classify as a deposit. Okay. I'm not going to go into too much detail. The malve, the half that's a loan, means the following, for our purpose, more or less, is, first of all, if it's a loan, the borrower has to pay it back. Right. However, he cannot pay it back with interest, because there's a prohibition against lending at interest. So the lender has some sense that he's going to get the money back. The way the Talmud defines it, now in our culture we may not define it this way. The way the Talmud defines it, in fact, for the loan, the lender is taking no risk, because the borrower is legally required to pay the money back. So, of course, we're not looking at bank statements and things like that. We're not classifying like we would do today how much risk is that. We're just assuming, okay, that guy's a good Jew and he's going to pay the money back, and he's going to follow the law. And by the way, we know he's got no money at all. So what's the point in doing bank statements and credit checks? Because he's got no money. Otherwise, he's not going to be borrowing the money. All we've got on him is the idea is that a good person doesn't borrow money and not pay it back. So from the Torah's perspective here, the borrower is not risking anything. The lender is not risking anything here. At the same time, it's a loan, so the borrower is allowed to do whatever he wants with the money. There's no prohibitions on that's a loan. I lend you the money. God bless you. You do whatever you want with it. I'm not telling you what to do with the money. Okay. Very different than the other, which is a pikadon. So a pikadon is a deposit, and the lender is it's interesting. Like, he's depositing money with the borrower and saying, here's my money. It belongs to me. It doesn't belong to you. Since it belongs to me, I have a really strong interest in what you're going to do with it. At the same time, I'm taking the entire risk. I'm assuming that what you're going to do with this money is going to make me money. It's going to make me money. So I'm assuming that's what's going to happen. So I'm risking the entire thing. But it never actually goes into your hands. I understand that you might lose it, but it never becomes yours. Whereas the loan actually does become his. Okay. Now, he's got to pay it back, but it becomes his money. The other thing I want to just point out, all this is assumed because in the Talmud it's already been clear, but not in our topic here. So, and you can read it in Steinsaltz. Is how the profit will work. So for the amount that's a loan, because you're not allowed to lend at interest, the borrower gets 100% of the profit. Okay, with those monies, the money that we're classifying as a loan. The borrower, who we'll also call the active partner, or the guy who's working on the ground, he gets 100% of the profit because it's just a loan. And a loan is something a friend does to a friend, and he gets 100% of the profit. At some point, of course, he's got to pay back the principal. But in terms of profit, he gets 100% of the profit, whereas the deposit, which is money that never belonged in any way to the borrower, the lender gets 100% of that profit. 100% of that profit. Okay? Now, in many ways, this is a legal fiction since he gives him a certain amount of money. But we're saying with a certain amount of money, we, the rabbis of the Torah, are dividing that into two parts. All of it is to, so there's no prohibition, so you're not violating the prohibition against lending and interest. Okay? So half of the money, the investor gets all of the profit, and half the investor gets none of the profit. Half the money, the investor takes no risk, right, and half the investor is taking all of the risk. Right. Okay? Is that clear?
Yes.
I have a hard time believing that's clear. Yeah. What?
Well, convertible to venture finance today.
All right, there you go. I'm glad we've got it today. Yeah.
The convertible part turns into equity.
Okay.
In the form of, in this case, rate.
Okay. All right. And then it says, Avud Rabbanan Milta, Denicha Leila Loveh, Venicha Leila Malveh. And so all this is a way the rabbis set up this system, a milta, meaning a system, that nicha leloveh means it works for the borrower. Works for the lender, v'nicha lemalveh, and it works for the borrower. One of the added difficulties is that in Hebrew, the word for borrower and lender sounds almost the same.
Yeah.
So, I confuse those things anyway. And then when the word in Hebrew is almost exactly the same, it gets very confusing. Okay. All right. Now, here's the first question. Hashted da amrina palga milveh. Now, once we're calling part of it a loan, half of it a loan, shapir dami. What happens if the borrower uses the money to drink beer? I like that. So it's just because remember, a loan has no conditions. A loan is always unconditional. Because a loan is from the goodness of your heart. God forbid I should profit from a loan. All I'm doing with a loan is helping you out, my brother, my sister, whatever. I'm helping you out, which means that there's no prohibitions. There may be some ethical prohibitions, right? But there's not any prohibitions. I'm giving you the money, so do what you want. So one rabbi says, well, this is an iska. It's a business arrangement. So what's to prevent the borrower from taking the money and going to the local tavern and just getting drunk? He's allowed to. There's nothing in the contract or the agreement that stops him from doing it as soon as you classify that bit of money as a loan. Okay. Rava Amar. So Rava says, Lachi karula iska. So Rava says, no. He says, we are actually making something new. We're calling this an iska. It's a whole new arrangement. Once you call it an iska, that means that even though normally we would think of a loan as having no strings attached, in this particular case, it does. We're creating this to allow businesses to flourish, so we are putting some strings on it. We're not saying that you can pay back with interest. We're not going that far with the loan itself, but we are saying that there are strings attached, de amar, because it will say it in, and when he says it will say, this will be understood as the law, ki yahiv nalach, when I'm giving you this money, le'esuke be, it's for our business, it's for our iska, the business arrangement, page 163, velo lemeshte be shichra, and not for you to go and drink beer. And obviously the go and drink beer means it's for that
not for your private use.
Not for your private use. In other words, and also not for your irresponsible use too.
Right.
And so it's a stand-in. It's not that everybody went around drinking beer with the borrowed money. It's saying that there could be some irresponsible, frivolous private uses, and this iska arrangement makes sure that those things don't happen. Prohibits that. Okay?
Do they have to declare that, or is that understood?
They will declare it, but it's also understood. As soon as we have it now in our Mishnah, it's understood. So now the rabbis know the law. Right. So if that guy goes off and drinks beer with it, even if it's not in the contract, the rabbis will say, wait a second, we have laws about iska, and you did this as an iska, so you were required to put that money into the business, and you didn't. So there would be civil penalties on that guy.
Is the word for beer the same as the modern day word for beer?
No. The modern day word for beer is bira. And shechar, it's interesting. I'm actually just using Steinsaltz's translation there of beer. Shikar, you've heard of that? Shikar is a Yiddish expression. It means to get drunk. So shechar also it means any intoxicating beverage. And I think Steinsaltz is relying on historians that the primary intoxicating beverage in those days that wasn't yain, which we had a word for, if it wasn't wine, it was beer. So, but I don't know.
No, they didn't have purified water. So.
Well, did they have whiskey, things like that? Did they?
They had rain, so they must have made a lot of whiskey.
Yeah. So anyway, I know they're referring to this. Every translation I've seen of shikur, that word in medieval Hebrew translates it as beer, but really it's a generic term for an alcoholic beverage, an intoxicating beverage. Okay, that's why you have shikar means a drunk, because what do those beverages do? They make you shikar. They make you drunk. Yeah. Even if it's not beer.
Or Yiddish?
It's Yiddish, but it's derived from the Hebrew shikur. Yeah, shikur. Okay, interesting topic. All right, so now it's a little bit more of just the implications of iska. Amar Rav Idi bar Avin, the immate. Okay, so now we're talking about the borrower. The borrower dies before he's repaid the loan. Okay, and I said before, he can do whatever he wants to with the money. If the money belongs to him, except go and get drunk with it. I mean, he's got to use it for the business itself, but he doesn't have to get permission for, I need to buy a few more tractors with the money. I mean, it's just assumed he can follow his own wisdom on this, but he's got to pay back the money. I mean, it's a loan, so you have to pay it back.
On these loans, is there a collateral? I don't
There
think it's
could
discussed.
be, but there could be a collateral, yeah.
Because you had mentioned
Yeah.
the other day with collateral that belongs to
Yeah.
the people, the family of the person.
So there could be collateral. I believe, let's assume for this particular case,
Excuse me, to the loan.
yeah, I get those mixed up too. Let's assume for this particular case there's no collateral because now the lender is looking to collect on the loan and the borrower died. So that becomes the case. So that's what Rav is referring to. Is it? No, Rav Idi. Amar Rav Idi bar Avin imate na'aseh metaltalin. Okay, so the loan now becomes, and I'll have to explain this a bit, the loan becomes classified as movable objects. Okay, I'm going to tell you two things here. One is the world is divided into two types of objects. Movable objects and non-movable objects. So non-movable objects are things like land, a house. For some odd reason,
Fixed assets.
fixed assets. So for some reason, slaves are also considered non-movable objects. They're considered property, right? Now there's also movable objects like a watch or cash or silverware. Okay. So and movable objects and non-movable objects have value. Okay. Normally, when there's a loan and the person dies, you are allowed to seize, if you're a creditor, you're allowed to, the loan becomes transferred to land, and you as the creditor are allowed to seize land. So land, and the government, the courts, the rabbis there will back you up, because that's how. Now, if there's rules about who gets primacy as a creditor, and because there could be many creditors, just like today, and there's rules in the Talmud, and they have to stand in line. But the general principle is a creditor, when the person dies, can seize land. You are not allowed to seize movable property. You're not allowed to seize it. It doesn't mean the loan is erased. It just means you aren't allowed to seize it. It means, so he says that that because this is an iska, it's a different kind of arrangement. It's not a normal loan. Na'aseh metaltalin, eitzel banav. So then for the heirs, that loan is something they inherit. They have to pay it back. But I, as the creditor, am not allowed to come in and take their silverware. They pay me on their time, So therefore, so Rav Idi bar Avin is saying that's something special for the iska, because it wasn't quite a loan; it was a business arrangement. So when the active partner dies, then the creditor, who was actually the investor, can't come in and seize his money. He's got to just wait. Because it now becomes metaltalin as opposed to karka. So karka is the term for land, but it means, what did you call it, Mel?
Fixed assets.
Fixed assets. Yeah.
So I have two questions.
Yeah.
One is what you mean by seize, and the other is, let's say...
Seize means you go and take it. Hi, this is my land. You owe me the money.
But let's say that that person who died
Yeah.
borrowed, I don't know, a certain amount of money.
Yeah.
And the land is worth 50 times that.
Yes, you take some of the land.
So you take a 50th.
You take a 50th of the land. Yeah.
Is the crop fixed, or is
That's what I-
that movable? No,
Crops are
ready for
fixed.
harvesting.
Crops are fixed. I mean, no, crops are metaltalin. So crops are movable objects.
You move it right away.
Yeah, but that, you're also making the
So you can't come in and take crops. So there's reasons for this. The assumption is that they need those things to live on. They can live without their land, and they owe the money.
And that
Yeah.
process is that borrower owns the land. Let's assume he's a lessee or borrows the money.
He doesn't have-
He's just a fixed hand.
Yeah.
And he doesn't work. That doesn't belong to him, the land. So what rights does the lender have?
It's a risk the lender takes when he's lending money. It is. I mean, and remember, their attitude is lending money is an act of friendship and generosity. So you may not get it back, but what you get in return is you did a good deed. Yeah. No, but they still owe the money. I mean, and there's ways, they're going to have to pay a percentage of it. They still owe the money. It's just that you can't seize it. For this particular case, you actually can seize land. But you're right. Most it's poor people in general that are borrowing money, and most poor people don't own land. So you're not going to get that mechanism to get your loan back if the borrower dies. Most of the time, you're not. You're right.
Yeah, you won't.
Well,
Yeah.
the crops
But the lender understands that that's part of the risk.
And the lender understands it, right? Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
crops-
Now, I said before, and I had sort of tongue in cheek, that in fact, from the Talmud's perspective, the lender is taking no risk at all, because the lender is assuming that eventually the borrower is going to pay back the money, which is different than a pikadon. If I'm depositing my money with you, and it's not like a bank deposit. It's more like if you deposit your money in a mutual fund. which to our sorrow, we often think of as a bank, where we're going to get some amount of interest until the economy collapses. This is like the mutual fund. You're depositing the money; it's entirely at risk. Nobody's protecting it from you, and you're hoping you get money in return. And it's up to you at this point to trust the active partner.
Right.
But a loan, you're not taking any risk at all from the point of view of the Talmud. Okay, yeah.
Rabbi, could you just say where specifically in the Torah it says that we're not allowed to charge interest?
Well, it was in my Torah reading when I was a bar mitzvah kid. so it's in the parasha Ki Teitzei. And we talked about this a bit last week too. It's Christianity inherited that too.
Right.
Both Judaism and Christianity have the idea and Muslims also, yes. So I don't know about Islam, but for Judaism and Christianity, the idea is that you don't lend an interest to your brother or sister, meaning your fellow Jew. So if you want to lend at interest, find a non-Jew. And Christians would do the same thing. So they would lend at interest to Jews and vice versa, which is why Jews became money lenders. So.
When the borrower dies, the family members are responsible for reimbursement. How far does that go?
It's the direct heir, whoever the heir is. Everybody has heirs.
What if how long does that continue in his life? Does it go to the direct heirs, children, or?
Yeah, I don't really know. I understand the question.
Or after 7 years, is it relinquished?
It's not subject to the 7-year thing here too, because with the Iska it certainly is, because at that point they'd already overturned that. So I mean, does it go to 3, 4, 5 generations? I don't really know. Okay. That's a good question. All right, we'll do a little bit more, and because Rava disagrees. So remember that Rava Edi Bar Aving here is making it harder for the investor to collect on that loan by suddenly reclassifying it as movable as opposed to a fixed asset to land. He's making it harder, which would slow down the economy, right? Because it would make investors less likely, because I won't be able to get it back. It'll be harder for me to get it back. Okay, Rava Amar. So Rava, you'll notice, protects the interest very often of the investors. So just like today, we have different political parties at different perspectives. Yeah, so and it's not so much, we fall into ethical categories sometimes, in the sense that I will say, as a Democrat, I might say I'm more ethical than you, Mr. Republican, and the Republicans would say the same thing. We both have to take a step back and think they're just looking at things from a different perspective. So Rava is feeling if we don't protect the investors, then there's not an economy. And other people are saying if we don't protect the borrowers, then also that hurts the economy. You had that in the State of the Union last night. So you could certainly classify this as just different approaches where both have potentially ethics on their side. Okay. Anyway, you'll notice in the Talmud that Rava is often concerned about investors. Okay. So Rava Amar, as he was before too, because Rava's the guy that steps in and says, no, he can't go and drink beer with that. Right. If you do that, then no one's going to want to lend him money. Right. So that's why we have rules with this, with the investment. So here Rava also says, Rava Amar, disagreeing with another rabbi, Lahachi karula iska. No, in an iska, this is why we set this thing up as an iska. You can hear the frustration in his voice, right? I mean, really, this is why we set this up as an iska, a special arrangement, de'im mate, because if he dies, lo yasem etatali meitzel banav. The loan doesn't become movable objects. It doesn't become hard to collect. It becomes easier to collect, or easy to collect. So in other words, at this point, the lender, he's saying, is allowed to seize the property and collect on the loan as soon as the active partner, who is the borrower, dies. Okay? That's Rava. That becomes the law too. Mostly because Rava was just very prominent, as a rabbi and did his homework. I think we're going to stop there.
That's really only a fairer approach, because as we said, the worker, who's the borrower, doesn't own land, but he has tools.